Hello friends, welcome back to another painting demonstration. Got a really nice fall scene for you today. So here's the reference photo I'm going to be working with. So we've got these beautiful fall colors mixed in with the green foliage. I particularly liked how that background hill is just covered in bright yellow and orange. And then you've got that pop of yellow and orange leaves in the foreground on the right-hand side. And then you've got that super fun little Easter egg of those mountain bikers, that group of mountain bikers, which I'm definitely going to be including in the scene. I also like how the trees kind of form this arc that recedes farther back into the distance as it moves to the left. So before we get into the painting, let's go over the colors that I'll be using on my palette today. So here are the colors I have on my palette. You'll notice that there aren't actually that many colors. I feel like I use a pretty limited palette. I've got it organized roughly from warm to cool. So yellow ochre, cadmium yellow, violet, cadmium red, cadmium orange, burnt sienna, burnt umber, cerulean blue, cobalt blue light, which has this nice kind of teal color, neutral tint, turquoise, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, and lavender. Alright, so just going to get my paper ready like I always do, wetting it down with this sponge on both sides so it lays flat, and so that it gives me more time to work wet into wet in the first wash. And while I'm getting the paper ready, I would like to mention that I now have a website, jacobbentzstudio.com, where you can download full-length video lessons, and you can also sign up for my newsletter. So I'm mixing up some nice bright yellow colors for that background hill, which I'm going to be dropping in first. Now in watercolor we work in layers. We layer washes on top of each other. So this would be the first wash, where I'm concerned with the lightest values in the scene. Essentially just toning the paper for the washes that will come after. And because the paper is wet, all of the colors are going to be very fuzzy and loose, which is exactly what I want in the first wash. I'm dropping in some extra vibrant yellow for those leaves in the foreground, those fall-colored leaves. I'm going to be dropping in some reds in there too, letting it all mix and blend together. Later on in the painting, I'm going to want this area to really pop out. And I'm going to achieve that effect by painting around this light area with a much darker shade. So mixing up a pretty basic sky color, cerulean blue, a little bit of cobalt blue light, some lavender. Keeping the tone fairly light and bringing it right down to the hill. Now we're just going to drop in some green grayish color for the ground area, and we'll be done with the first wash. Just dropping in some of the lighter green color for these trees, some of the more vibrant green. Okay, so that's the first wash done. Now I'm going to let the paper dry, and then we will continue with the second wash. So I'm going to mix up a nice rich green color. We're going to start with the trees on the right hand side. The second wash is all about the middle value tones. And my goal is always to connect as many of the middle value shapes into one big shape as I can. So we're just going to indicate the texture of those leaves, especially toward the edge of the shape where they're silhouetted against the sky. I really want to indicate the texture of these trees for the ones that are closer to us. And then the farther away the trees get, the less detail I'm going to give them. So see here, I'm starting to paint around the shape of those bright orange and red leaves. I really want that to pop out. So by making the surrounding area quite a bit darker, we'll be able to achieve that effect. I'm dry brushing some areas here and there, leaving some areas of lighter green, kind of hinting at the sunlight shining through the canopy. And same thing with these bright red and yellow leaves. I'm breaking up the edge of the shape, kind of hinting at the shape of those individual leaves just toward the edge. And all these trees, even though they're separate individual trees, I'm painting them as one big mass, one big shape. And they all blend together. Dropping in some darker yellow into these red and yellow leaves just to start giving that shape a little bit of form, a little bit of volume. Now, one thing I try to always do while painting anything that's green, be it foliage or grass, trees, plants, is always try to add variety to the mixture of green that you're using. Throw a little bit of blue in here, a little more red there, a little more yellow. Adding those subtle variations to the green will make it much more convincing and much more realistic. So I'm just glazing over the ground area with a light wash of yellowish green. I started to paint the shadow of those trees, but then I realized that the ground needed to be a little more green colored than it was. So I'll save those shadows for later on. The shadows are all going to be basically dark value anyway. Now I'm going to start painting these pine trees, which are very interesting blue color. They're really not green at all, maybe very slightly green. These beautiful ponderosa pines, for some reason, the way the light is in this scene, are very blue. They usually aren't so blue out in the wild, but I really like that effect. And it just so happens that those pine trees are farther back in the scene, so making them blue is going to help give them that sense of being farther away. So it works out really well. And you see that I dropped that blue color in and connected it to that lighter green of that tree to the right. So it's still all flowing as one shape, even though there's different colors blending into each other. And we're going to connect that right into those trees that are farther in the distance. I'm really taking my time making sure that I accurately portray the shape of these trees because they're very distinctive looking and they have a lot of personality. Ponderosa pines are a very distinctive looking tree, so I wanted to do them justice. And they're essentially silhouetted against that very warm hill in the background. And that's another thing that I love about this scene is the interplay between warm and cool colors. It's happening all over the place in the scene. You've got the sky, and then that warm hill, and then in front of the hill you've got those cool pine trees, and then more towards the right you've got those very warm greens and yellows and reds. So with these background trees, you see that I'm making them all one shape. I'm connecting all of the trees together, and those background trees connect right into the trees in the foreground. This is all the part of the middle value shape. Leaving some gaps in the canopy of these trees so that that hillside shows through from behind. I'm really trying to simplify the shapes of these trees and not get caught up in all the tiny details, especially since they're farther away. I want to give just enough detail to get the idea across. Now right here I realize that there's this little strip of bright green foliage that separates the hillside from the ground that I should have painted before worrying about those pine trees, but it's not a big deal. I can just drop that in right now. So those trunks of the pine trees are going to get a little bit fuzzy because I'm adding fresh paint right next to it, but it's not really a big deal. I'm going to end up painting over those trunks again anyway because they're very dark. And this is all just a grayish blue color that I'm using for these ponderosa trees. This scene has a really great sense of scale. You really get a sense of how big this landscape is. And a lot of that is going to happen when I drop in those mountain bikers at the very end. You see how tiny they are compared to those trees right behind them. And then at the top of the hill, you've got this row of ponderosa trees that look really, really small. But it's the exact same kind of tree. That gives you a sense of perspective and scale. This is a place called Lockett Meadow, which is in the inner basin of the San Francisco Peaks near Flagstaff, Arizona. It's a really big fall tourist attraction because here in Arizona, in most desert places, you don't really get the fall experience. You don't get the leaves changing color and all of that. The only thing you get is it gets slightly less hot. So you have to travel and actually go find fall vibes, fall leaves, the cool weather. So fall tourism, autumn tourism is definitely a thing in Arizona. It's a pretty unique aspect of this place, I would say. I don't know if many other places have that. And the reason that entire hillside is covered in yellow is because there was a big fire that swept through here a few years ago, and it burnt down all of these big aspen trees and pine trees. But now you've got all these new aspen trees growing up, these little tiny baby aspen trees covering the hillside, and every one of them is changing to yellow and red. Their leaves are changing. So it gives this really beautiful effect. So starting to drop in the trunk of that aspen tree that's really close to us. I dropped in the shadows of the trees on the right-hand side. I'm starting to add in the darks at this point, so we can consider this the third wash. And I'm just adding a little bit of texture into the canopy of these trees, and the shadows, of course. So I'm going to paint around the edge of this shape here for this tree. That'll create some separation between these two trees. Again, I'm going to paint around those bright fall colored leaves, make them really pop out. Dropping in a few trunks here and there, connecting them to the shadows on the ground. So you can see now how much those orange and yellow leaves are popping out after having darkened up everything around them. Yeah, most of the rest of what I'm going to be doing is just adding texture into the trees. And I need to be careful not to go too hard with the darks. You don't want to kill all of your light. Use your darks only where necessary. Starting to paint in some of those smaller branches. I'll be doing a lot more of that towards the end, adding in the small details. Dropping in some of those cast shadows on the ground. You'll notice that some of these trees don't actually have a shadow because there's a slight ridge in the ground, and the base of the tree is actually behind that ridge, so you can't see the shadow. darkening up that foliage just a little bit, bringing it a lot closer to the value of those pine trees. Now just doing some dry brushing across the ground, giving it a little more texture, making the green just a bit more vibrant. I'm going to push the darks in these trees that are close to us just a little bit more. I'm kind of stippling with my brush. I've got the brush splayed out so it's got teeth, and I'm kind of just tapping into the tree. It gives a really nice, very fine texture. But I'm only going to do that in the trees in the foreground. I'm just going to add a little bit of twigs and branches here and there with this really sharp tipped brush. It's kind of like a calligraphy pen. Scratching out some light branches with my fingernail. Adding in some of that texture for the bark on that aspen tree. Darkening up a few of those trunks. Now there's a bunch of these trunks that are kind of standing straight up from these old dead trees, and they're moving up the hillside. So I'm going to be dropping a lot of those in. I think it's a really cool little detail that tells the story of what's happened at this place. You've got the trunks of those old dead aspen trees and pine trees sticking up, and then you've got the new life all around it. Now I'm just going to continue doing that, and I will drop in those pine trees on top of the hill. I'm just very loosely indicating those shapes. Also going to add a little bit more texture to the ground. Since it's still damp, I'll get these nice soft shapes. And I'm using a gray mixture that is similar in color to the ponderosa trees in the midground, but it's slightly more washed out. That just gives the impression that these trees are very far away. I also find it interesting that they're only growing at the very top of that ridge. It's almost like the hillside has a frame. It creates a little bit of separation between the sky and the hillside. And just adding a little more texture to the hillside with some dry brushing. I really ended up kind of doing a glaze over the whole thing. It was just looking a little too washed out. I'm going to dry off this area real quick, and we're going to drop in those mountain bikers. After I drop in just a few more trunks on the hillside. Okay, so just going to be a very simple representation of somebody on a bike. Since these figures are so far away, it does not have to be precise. It's basically just 2 circles for the wheels and then something that kind of looks like a person on a bike. Now, I am absolutely terrible at drawing or painting anything that has to do with human beings or faces or bodies or anything like that, but I can do figures. Because figures are just really abstract, tiny little shapes that you drop in. You don't have to spend too much time on them. Just very simple representations. And that just gives such a sense of scale to this place. I really love that effect. I also ended up making this group of bikers 3 instead of 4. I think it was 4 in the reference photo. I thought the 3 looked a little better. Then I'll just take a tiny bit of gouache and I'll add a dot on top of their heads for their helmets, reflecting the sun. Of course, you want to make sure they're completely dry before you do that. Otherwise, the gouache will just spread out everywhere. Just tiny little dots. Now we'll use that same gouache and splatter a little bit on these trees. Just give it a little bit of sparkle. Add just a few little highlights here and there. You don't want to go too crazy with the gouache. It's so easy to ruin a painting doing this. You have to be very careful. just going to drop my signature on this, and we're going to call this a finished painting. So I really appreciate you watching. I really hope you learned something. Please do subscribe if you haven't already for more videos just like this. Check out my website for full-length painting videos and my newsletter, and I'll see you on the next one.